good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to be together today. My name is Lori, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm so grateful for this time we have together. As I think about this season, as we come to the end of the calendar year and the days get shorter, there's also the anticipation of the new year and a new start and the coming of more light. And so I think it's really a perfect time for us to gather, to reflect, to connect, envision, and to nourish ourselves. And so we are all very, very welcome here, however we are coming to this space. In this beautiful, challenging, important work that we're all engaged in around place-based justice, it really calls us to bring our full selves. It takes our minds, our hearts, our bodies, our spirits. So to help us enter into this space today for retreat, we'll spend the next 20 minutes or so settling into our space, into this time together, setting some intentions and connecting with the mind, body, and heart. So Molly and I will guide us through an activity to help ground us for the day. And so I will turn it over to Molly.
Morning and welcome. So we're going to start with a practice called a gentle movement practice to connect with your brave heart. It's developed by Uw-Madison from mindfulness.org. So what we'd like you to do, just be comfortable in your space. You can be standing or seated. You feel free to turn off your cameras. I think Lori and I will keep ours on for the session, but just get comfortable. So start by finding that comfortable space. Ground yourself when you're standing or you're seating, and find the connection between your feet and the ground. And start to feel your breath coming into your body. You may be breathing into your chest or breathing into your belly. How does the breath feel coming in? How does the breath feel as it leaves? Put your right hand on your belly to really feel your breath in your belly. And put your left hand on your heart to really feel your heartbeat. Notice your breath and your heartbeat as we honor these two factors that keep us in harmony.
Gently release your hands to your knees and continue to notice your breath. When we tap into our conscious breath and a conscious mindset, we are able to bring awareness to our inner emotions and the light within us. And when we take time to tap into that space, we realize we can connect with the peace within us.
Start to lengthen the breath. The long inhale. The longer exhale. The breath is our first form of nourishment. And when we take a long exhale, it allows us to pause, to rest, to recenter, and digest. It can help release our heart and tell us we're in a safe space. Imagine the exhale removing all that we don't need from our body, and the inhale embracing everything that nourishes us. And we can imagine the same process happening in our mind. Release any anxiety or stress you're holding. Make room for love and those things within you that nurture, strengthen, and give you courage.
Breathe into your heart center. Relax your jaw. Relax your tongue. Relax the space between your eyebrows. Soften the space between your ears and connect with that space deep inside of yourself. We have everything we need within us. All the courage, all the stamina, all the forgiveness, all the kindness. Embrace it all as you step in to your brave heart.
Feel what it feels like to embrace the tools that serve you. Begin to move your hands up toward the sky, embracing all that serves you. Meet your palms at center above your head and reach your fingertips up high. Take a long inhale, lengthen the fingers. As you exhale, draw the shoulders down the back.
On your next exhale, turn your palms out and move your arms back down until they are straight at your sides. Your hands are parallel to the ground. Extend the fingertips.
On your next inhale, bend your forearms up as if mimicking a cactus. Your elbows are parallel to the ground and your fingertips are extended. Take a long exhale. Draw the elbows to meet at the heart center. Move your arms closer together until your elbows, wrists, fingers, and palms connect. Bow your head and set an intention for our time together today.
Relax your jaw again. Relax your tongue. Relax your shoulders. Be with your breath. Be with your heartbeat. And set your intention with love, openness, and kindness as your foundation.
Inhale, moving your arms back up toward the sky and release your intention out to the universe. Take a half twist to the right by lowering your right hand down to the ground behind you while placing your left hand to the outside of your right leg or knee. Inhale, lengthen the spine. Exhale, twist the rib cage and shoulders to the right.
On the next inhale, leave the left hand where it is. Move your right hand up toward the sky, shifting it all the way over to your left knee or thigh. With the elbows crossed, tuck the chin to your chest. Tilt the pelvis up and let your heart space open into your spine as your shoulders open up. Breathe into that back heart space and soften the space between your ears.
On the next inhale, come up to a comfortable position, keeping the elbows gently crossed. Hug your shoulders and breathe into this change.
Now take a half twist to the left, letting your left hand come down to the ground behind you and the right hand down to the outside of the left knee. Inhale to lengthen the spine and exhale to twist. Twist the rib cage and the shoulders to the left.
When you're ready, move your left hand back up to the sky, moving it all the way over until the left hand meets your right knee or thigh. The elbows are crossed. Tuck your chin to the tip of your chest. Tilt your pelvis up and let your heart space open into your spine as your shoulders open up. Breathe into that space, soften the space between your toes.
On the next inhale, come up to a comfortable position, keeping the elbows gently crossed. Hug your shoulders.
Inhale, stretching your arms back up over your head once more. As you exhale, bring your arms back down to rest on your hands or your knees, your legs. Just sit and take 3 long, full breaths. Ready? Open your eyes. Thank you, everyone. What we want to do next is give a little bit of just one-on-one check-in time with each other. And I'll put a couple questions. I'll put them now into the chat. More questions? And after the exercise, just what did you notice in yourself? What's rising as you're entering today's space? What are some of the hopes that you're bringing with you? And what might be distracting or pulling your attention away? How might you set that down as we end our time together? So Laura, I think, is going to send us into individual rooms to check in with each other, and we'll come back at 10. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you. I want to thank Lori and Molly for leading us there this morning in that gentle and intentional arrival. I always feel like it takes me the first bit of time in something like a retreat today. So that was beautiful. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Pigza. I use she, her pronouns, and I am with St. Mary's College of California. Work on the member engagement group for the network. So our time today, we're here until 1 p.m. Pacific. We put together this slide that just explains kind of the flow of the day. And the three words that really capture our purpose are to reflect, to connect, and envision. So we just are doing the welcome right now. We will have some time together. I'm not going to lead us through all of this agenda. You can kind of take it in. I will say we are trying to be kind to our eyes and our energy. So there are 2 15-minute breaks, and you see like the approximate time for when those are going to happen. Obviously, however, we've all learned in the last almost 2 years now, whenever you need to turn off your screen or step away, we know that that's potentially going to happen for folks, and encourage you to do what you need to do for yourself. We're going to do some kind of conversation. Our first conversation will really be about like, what is the purpose of Place-Based Justice Network at its core? So like, in kind of reminding ourselves of that and perhaps refining that for ourselves. We will, and then in the later part of the day, really look at our vision, like what is the prophetic edge of this network? And so using today's retreat to really think about our network intentions, our network actions, and also how are we continuing to be accountable with one another. So you'll see the practical outcomes and accountability. We have 2 colleagues who will just share some of the things they've been doing at their institution as a way of kind of adding some practicality in a way of showcasing a couple peers. And sometimes when we showcase, we're not showcasing necessarily we're definitely not showcasing the perfect, but we are showcasing people and programs and initiatives and institutions in progress. And so that's the intention of that learning. We will aim to end on time because it is Friday. Some of us are drinking coffee still. Some of us are wishing we could have our lunches already. So we will aim to end on time. So thank you everyone for being here. If I could have the next slide, Laura. So our outcomes, which we mentioned, connecting and deepening our shared purpose, doing our somatic grounding. Excuse me, someone calls in this moment. Confirmations and challenges to our work, and co-envisioning the future of the network. We often begin our gatherings at our institutions and in this Place-Based Justice Network with a land acknowledgement. So I am coming to you from Oakland, California, the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone. And I recognize that every member of the Oakland community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of the land in which I sit. I'm affirming Indigenous sovereignty and for work to hold the community more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. So I offer that, and I also offer that I have begun to feel uncomfortable and incomplete in making these kinds of statements. And we're in the midst in our own staff of trying to decide what to do. There are 3 resources I've listed here. One is a Zoom event from the University of San Francisco. And I think when we share the slides, you'll be able to click through these. Also the Epistemic Justice Project, which some of our colleagues in the network, including John Loggins, are involved in. have written some things about the limitations of land acknowledgements. And then there's a document from CSU San Marcos. Thank you, Gavin, for listing where you're coming, where your lands are. So thank you. Let me just pause, actually, before we go hand it over to Julia, are there any questions or clarifying things that people need to put out there? All right, so we're a group of 24 today, as that's what Zoom tells me, and which means we can mostly see each other when we're in a large group on the screen. If you kind of squish the slides smaller, we will be doing both some large group things as well as breakout rooms to help mix up our time together. I really appreciated that opening trio. Thank you. And though at this point, your contributions in conversation have been mostly in your trio, we do aim to have quite a bit of conversation and opportunity for people to contribute throughout the time together. So we're going to move to our first large conversation, and Julia Anderson of the Anchor Learning Network, who has also participated and is helping to reconceptualize the BIPOC Leadership Collective, is going to launch us into that conversation. So Julia, thank you so much for doing that with us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and kicking it off to me. Again, my name is Julia. My pronouns are she and her. And as was stated, I'm the program manager of the Anchor Learning Network. So before diving into our guided discussion for today, I just wanted to invite you all into a contemplative space with me by soliciting your responses to the following question, which I'm placing in the chat box. The question is, what problem does place-based community engagement seek to address? And I invite you to share your responses in the chat, take a moment to reflect on it a little bit. And for the next couple of minutes, we'll just collect your responses and I'll read some of them out as they come in. And so I'm going to copy it in here again, since I know folks are sharing some resources. But the question is, what problem does place-based community engagement seek to address? Thanks, Karen, for kicking us off. I see place-based engagement seeks to address an imbalance of power and systemic injustice, particularly between campus and community. From Jennifer, structural and systemic harm to people, places, minds, and hearts. I see to recognize the agency of all our local collaborators. PBE seeks to acknowledge power inequities and shift how the geography of opportunity and inclusion can decenter institutions and elevate critical lenses. From Gavin, I think it seeks to address historical injustices that higher education has caused communities, thus further marginalizing groups who are already economically and socially oppressed. A couple of more, the ways in which institutions show up and engage in community-based workspaces. From Kent, place-based community engagement seeks to address the breakdown of community and connection arising from systemic oppression and the closing of hearts and minds. We'll wait about 30 seconds more for folks to share. All right, folks, they're trickling in. Seeks to address disconnection, separation, and inequity. All right, awesome. Thank you all for entertaining this question and for participating in this way. I offered this question not to be a trick question, but I wanted to sort of showcase the breadth of perspectives that are represented within the Place-Based Justice Network, to kind of show how we as a collective with shared values and a shared vision all have different ways of situating ourselves in the work, and articulating the problems that are related to our specific geographic and institutional context, as well as how our identities influence the way that we show up in the work. But I also wanted to create an opportunity to reflect on a question that I don't think we get the opportunity to ask very often. In spaces that I've been in particular, we do spend a lot of time defining and codifying what constitutes community engagement, civic engagement, place-based community engagement, but we don't get as much opportunity to articulate and build consensus on what the problem is that we're seeking to address. And I think it's important for us to center the problem, especially given the reflections that we've had over the last year with respect to repair and institutional transformation in this work. And learning and reflection that this space has really allowed me to cultivate is how transformation and repair really requires acknowledging the legacies of harm in our communities and in ourselves, and the need for healing in our communities, both off campus and on campus. So if you go to the next slide, please, Laura. So this discussion is an invitation and an opportunity to surface reflections on the role of healing and collective care in our work. And we wanted to create this space because we as practitioners in the field and we as a network are really uniquely situated to repair relationships between institutions and communities, but also to do so in a way that emphasizes healing and collective care. And I don't think that's exclusive to the work that we deploy in community. I think it also says a lot about how we behave and show up for each other and engage in collective care for one another. This is really salient to me, especially as a professional of color who's seen a lot of BIPOC women leave the field. And I've thought a lot about what and how collective care could look like, and how might collective care be a strategy for retaining ourselves and retaining each other in the field. And so just to clarify what I mean by healing and collective care. So when I say healing, I mean attending to the root causes of pain and repairing harm. And when I say collective care, I mean applying compassion on behalf of others. So sort of moving us away from the emphasis on self-care and thinking more critically about what care on behalf of others and with others looks like. And so this conversation is really just an exercise and an opportunity to unpack what's resonating with folks, what folks are reflecting on in their own personal work and the work of the network, as well as the themes that we've been chewing on for the last year around transformation and transformative justice. So if you go to the next slide for me, we have some questions to activate your thinking on this. And so the intention of these questions are not for you to respond to each and every one of them. They are really just to provide you a way to think about this and personalize it and help guide your reflection and thinking about it. What I've done to sort of help is I just created a slide that you all can reference, because you'll be broken out into small groups, and we'll give you the opportunity to unpack these questions and other insights and reflections that you have on this topic together. So I think in a moment, Laura will be breaking you off into small groups for about 15 to 20 minutes to really unpack this. So before doing that, does anyone have any questions about the exercise? Great. I was on mute. Welcome back, everyone. Laura, would it be okay for us to be in the gallery view rather than sharing a slide for this part?
Yes.
Awesome. Like to pretend we're in circle in person for this kind of stuff. So we have, I think, about 10-ish minutes before moving on. So I do want to respect the schedule since I know there's a lot today, but I did also want to create space for folks to share what's alive for them based off of their group conversations. And so if we could get a few volunteers to share their reflection. We're still a relatively small group, so I just invite you to come off mute and share.
I'm really intrigued by thinking of the sense of place and how that roots us in the history of that place, and recognizing the power of that's come through organizing in the particular neighborhoods that we're working in. And then when I think of personal care and collective care, I just want to express gratitude to a number of you during the pandemic and being isolated at home, just the sense of not being alone in sort of the journeys that we've been on and the ways we've connected. And even a couple of you, we were on a call when the Capitol was being attacked last January. I just have such distinct memories of sort of holding those spaces. So gratitude for the sense of care present here.
I really appreciated our conversation. A lot to think of. It's hard to capture it all, but we had a conversation about, perseverance with this work and building the capacity to do it and stick with it when people are hurting or in pain. And then I think Julia said something that wrinkled both Catherine and I's brain, is like, there's this kind of backlash around naming and holding people accountable as kind of a council culture or a call out culture, but thinking about accountability as care, and understanding that, the things that we're asking are rooted in healing communities. And, I can see how I can accept that and believe it, but I can also see how, how it can be resisted. But, I really appreciate that framing, and it's given me a lot to think about.
I think we talked about a lot of things, but one of the things that we connected on was this idea that that there's a lot of privilege held up in being in healing spaces and being able to be open to those spaces, and that for a lot of our communities and for us in those communities, circumstances make it really difficult to be in a healing stage of your day, and meeting basic needs and being fed and being safe and being housed are more immediate, and that healing feels like it has to, I'm not sure if it has to wait or if it has to happen in a different way because other needs have to be met now. So to be in a space in that room when we talk about my healing and what I'm getting to do, and the privilege of being able to do go to therapy and have insurance to do that, and have time to do that, and have a job that allows me to do that. That's a privileged thing. And I think that could be useful for everybody, but the reality of our circumstances means that that's not always open to everybody or accessible in the same way.
Just to build on that, I promise I won't keep talking. That, one of the things, to say we're healing presumes to think that like the wounding is stopped. And I feel like that's the other piece that we just talked about in our group a lot, is that, like, you can't heal from a stab wound if the knife's still in you. And, us refusing to kind of address that there's ongoing harm being done, and our inability to do anything to stop it is I think, impeding the healing process, clearly.
One of the things that our group talked about too was just the necessity to think, or the benefit of looking at places and histories and contexts allows us avenues to get out of individualist thinking, which I think for those of us who grew up in the US is so ingrained in you, right? So the possibilities of that, and our group didn't quite get there, but I think we were moving this direction of thinking about, in spaces where you start to think about collective care, you really have to change how you think about a lot of things like agency and ownership. So yeah, that's a little bit of what our group was talking about.
Lori, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. John, what you shared really resonated with that the idea of you can't heal if the knife's still in you, and sort of thinking about how many of us are experiencing a loss of our colleagues who are leaving our institutions and leaving the field. And as we are trying to bring new people into that work, it feels like there's still a knife there. And so how can we welcome people in, even as we know that we're bringing them into a space that can lead to continued wound and harm? So just sort of holding that in a place as I'm thinking about healing in the midst of there still being structures that are causing harm and pain.
Yeah, an observation that came up in our group was that sometimes the place-based work doesn't always feel like healing. It can feel combative, and it can feel like we've got stuff to do and we've got to, resist the institution and all this stuff. And I don't know, sometimes it doesn't feel like healing. It can feel very stressful, and like, maybe we're trying to remove the knife, and that's tough work. But at the same time, you feel like you're doing something meaningful. So maybe there's some healing in that. But yeah, just for me anyways, it can sometimes feel really combative.
This is a wonderful reflection and discussion, and I unfortunately be the person to shift the conversation just a little bit. One thing John Loggins, you mentioned was accountability as healing. And hopefully now this part of the conversation is looking at that accountability piece and the practicum outcomes piece. As Jennifer said, how can we showcase what we're doing, not as perfect, but how are we institutions in progress towards this healing? And so with that in mind, I want to invite a couple institutions to just kind of share their story. Gavin Luter from University of Wisconsin-Madison and Molly Ayers from Gonzaga University. For the next 5 to 10 minutes each, maybe share some of your story, some of your practical outcomes. And Gavin, if you wouldn't mind starting off, sharing a little bit about your work.
Sure. Yeah. And just to kind of acknowledge somebody who just came in the room, my colleague Corey Sprinkle from Uw-Madison and the Morgard Center for Public Service is here because he's one of my co-conspirators in the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition. And so I try to never do presentations alone. So yeah, I wanted to welcome Corey into the space. Corey, you just want to say hi real quick?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for let me kind of jump in at the end of your conversation. I appreciate being here. Thanks.
Great. All right. So I'm going to kind of drive the presentation. Then I might just say, hey, Corey, do you want to add anything? Because Corey was gracious and just like I told him I was doing this 2 days ago, and he said, yeah, sure, I'll show up. So anyway, if somebody can go to the next slide. Okay, so the this was kind of an outgrowth at our institution. We created a coalition called the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition. Badger, Bucky Badger, sorry, UW-Madison, that's our mascot. So some of you all might not know why we would call ourselves the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition. Yeah, and we were very frustrated that our institution wasn't really doing much. And so we wanted to actually address the historical injustices that I think more and more people grew conscious of after the murder of George Floyd. So we came together and wanted to do something that could really shake our institution up. And so we got kind of inspired. I don't know if you all have any of these sustainability offices on your campus that like assess your event to see how green it is. You know, they'll come in, they have like this big checklist, and I don't know, rubrics seem to be big things in higher ed, and people respond well to rubrics. So we're like, hey, what if we create a rubric to figure out if your department, center, institute, college, or unit is actually engaging in anti-racist work. And so we have done this. So the next slide, if you go to the next slide, we realize that we are also standing on the shoulders of a lot of people who have done some rubrics, and we had a lot of community-based rubrics that we found around, you know, is our organization an anti-racist organization? So based on that work, conversations with BIPOC leaders on campus, we created kind of 12 categories of areas that we think almost any campus unit can probably identify with. We realized there were some overlaps, and some people like, yeah, we don't do curriculum. Okay, fine, then just skip that section. So these are the 12 categories that we created. And if you go to the next slide, we came up with 3 different levels. So we didn't want to start with level 1. We want to start with level 0. If you're colluding and actively oppressing people, you're at level 0. And then if you move to level 1, like we're doing something, we might just be reproducing norms. Level 2 is kind of a higher level, but it's still like, oh, you're just making people feel as though maybe in some symbolic way they belong more. Shared power and liberation is the kind of the top level. You can almost think of this as like that ladder of participation, public participation. I kind of think of that as like part of our motivation here, if you all know what I'm talking about. So I just wanted to pause and say, Corey, did you want to add anything before I give some examples, or I don't know?
Yeah, I think I'll just add in. I think it's another thing that really informed kind of our start to this work was working with like student activists. So there was a student activist really involved in my office, the Morgan Center for Public Service, that was helping us be aligned to some of our primary engaged student groups on campus, and thinking about the kind of work that they wanted to see as well, and how this rubric might be a way to kind of formalize that in a way that we can assist with. Great.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. And I will say that, like, you know, my work, I think even Kent maybe sent me a resource that, you know, we kind of incorporated into this specific rubric. So I can't remember exactly what one it was, Kent, but something that you had sent me was like, oh yeah, this sounds interesting. And I think, because I think I've mentioned this before, but I wanted you all to know that we've made some progress. So if you go to the next slide, we're just going to give one of 2 examples. So for instance, the category of history, you know, does your unit acknowledge its own history of racism and oppression? And I'm not going to read all these things on the screen, but I just wanted to give you a minute to kind of take in like what it says. Obviously we have the different levels, and then we actually try to put a resource in there of people who might be able to help on campus, help you acknowledge history. So we actually have a UW-Madison public history project, which does talk about our history of inequities. So yeah, you can kind of see this, and you can get a sense of what we mean by the different levels. And don't worry, I'll give you a link where you can actually go read more of these things. Okay, the next slide. We created a category around purchasing, for instance. You know, a lot of people, especially, I mean, I've always been a little jealous of the private institutions because you have a lot more control over your purchasing than public institutions do. Some of our contracts are negotiated at the state level, and we just can't really get out of them. But we certainly make a lot of individual decisions at the unit level of like where to buy lunch and, you know, all these like supplies that we purchase. In our research around purchasing, we actually found that the University of Wisconsin system has a 5% goal through state statute of purchasing from so-called minority-owned businesses. And while that is a problematic term, that is what the state and the federal government uses as a category of a certified business. And so there's actually a database of businesses that qualify as minority-owned businesses in the state. And we want to use this partially as like an educational tool for our campus to realize that, did you know that you should be thinking about this and maybe even exceeding the 5% minimum? So that's kind of the level 3. So I wanted to stop there. Corey, did you want to add anything to the history or the purchasing thing?
I guess I would just say that like it's a little bit probably oftentimes outside of the realms that we're often talking about, right? So Gavin's done some great work to engage like administrative staff in my center, this Mortgage Center for Public Service, like to think about how we start to have these conversations and think about anti-racism in other spaces. Kind of the community engaged realm might be more fluent in some of these conversations, obviously still work to be done, but like thinking about those tangible areas where change can happen, those bureaucracies that we often run into, and how we can engage folks in working towards anti-racist changes as well.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. And spoiler alert, the rubric isn't done. But we still, because we're totally open source, I've put a link in the chat. And if you go to the next slide, our next steps could very much include you. Help us figure out how to finish this rubric. We are a small but mighty group of about 7 or 8 people who are doing this work on our campus. We actually have a little kind of like retreat, quote unquote retreat, basically a day of like a virtual meeting. We might do in person, we're not sure, where we'll just like knock out some of the rest of the parts of the rubric that have not been completed yet. But yeah, we absolutely want to do this. And I want you all to know that we intend to start piloting the rubric this spring. And we actually did a presentation at our so-called diversity forum at our campus. We had about 1,000 people tune in and learn about the rubric. We have about 13 or 14 campus entities who want to participate in piloting this. This is a self-study, basically, that individual units can do on their own. They could get somebody from the outside to come in and actually do a study, but you know, it's meant at this point to just be a self-study. But yeah, that's our lightning talk. And we wanted to see if you all had any questions. If you could stop sharing the screen, please. Okay, yeah, we're back. I can see you. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything?
Kevin, how are you gathering the data on it? Is it like an assessment, or do you take like their civic action plan or their policies and run it through the rubric, or how are you?
Yeah, I mean, we're not right now thinking about how to collect data because we don't want to make it more intimidating than perhaps it already is. And like, we don't want them to think that this is going to be reported to some outside group or something like that. We're just trying to create an opportunity for kind of internal reflection. And we hope that campus units, you know, somebody like you, John, or Kent would be like, hey, I want to see how our Center for Civic Engagement stacks up against all these different metrics. And let's have some internal conversations. And you can do it one year and then do it the next year and say, hey, we have an action plan for our own campus unit for how we're going to achieve some anti-racism work. And then you could kind of go back and score yourself again in a year. So, I mean, we don't necessarily intend to be a big data collection thing, although we are having conversations with our we'll just call it Campus Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office, about how this might be able to gel with some of the campus assessments that they're already doing to assess campus climate or your own climate within your entity. But we haven't really agreed with them yet. I mean, we're kind of like this, I don't want to call it rebel group. I mean, that's kind of like an overstatement, but we're like a hyper like grassroots in terms of staff that really don't have much power at our institution, dropping this in front of as many people as we can to say, hey, you should be thinking about these things. And maybe somebody at the top will be like, hey, we need to be collecting some data on this, but we're not really in that position right now.
Gavin, I think a lot about like at GU we did, and maybe Molly's going to talk about this in a little bit, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but around the multicultural organizational development tool, the MCOD, and we did like a self-assessment a few years ago and have like institutional partners who've been a part of that process. But I think about something like this being useful to a network like ours, and how are we, if we're members of PBJN and accountable to the values, and anti-racism is one of those values, how are we sharing our progress in real time with each other for peer-to-peer accountability? And I think that could be a powerful way to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Anthony, or Tony, which sometimes I call you. Great. Okay, I don't want to steal too much more time away from Molly here, but yeah, this is a flash talk. It's like 5-10 minutes. Now you know, and certainly, I mean, this should all be said, like, this was inspired by our work at the Place-Based Justice Network. As we were having conversations, deeply reflective conversations about anti-racist practice in community engagement, we thought, how can we take these things to a broader campus audience? Because sometimes it feels a little too niche within our own community engagement spheres. And so we've tried to engage. We have somebody from Extension on our BART group. We have somebody from the Mortgage Center. We have somebody from the Center for Humanities. And so we just have a few more campus entities than just community engagement entities. I think that was another important thing. But all this to say, thank you, Place-Based Justice Network, for encouraging us to be reflective about this work, and hopefully something like this can work on our campus, and we'll keep you updated. Thanks.
Thanks, Gavin. Molly, would you like to share?
Yeah, and first of all, Gavin, I think, and Anthony knows this, I'm thinking about our team would love to see this, and these are conversations we've been having. So really excited to see kind of how that comes together and learn from what you've put together. So I'm gonna share my slides here. And I think I took a little bit different route than Gavin in some ways. I was thinking about the prompt, and one of the things I appreciated, there was a note in there about inviting, I guess, a sense of vulnerability and truth telling in our work and in our process. And I think what this lightning talk provided me was just some space for some real deep reflection and time to think about how this work with Place-Based Justice Network has transformed our work at Gonzaga. I think, Anthony, you would agree too that this has been, the questions asked in these spaces have changed kind of who we are and how we show up, and continue to shape and reshape who we are. I'm Molly Ayers. I work at Gonzaga Center for Community Engagement. I use she, her pronouns. Anthony's with me too today. You know, I wasn't sure he was going to be able to attend, so I'm going to invite him in and out of this conversation to share insights, because he always has just incredible perspective and has been part of our team really navigating and negotiating these big questions. What I wanted to start with is just the questions that we were provided as part of the prompt, and the first was around how participation in the network has affected our work on the ground, and how does or can this work look like in practice, and then how are we integrating anti-racist values and strategies in the place-based work. And when I sat with these, I thought about some of the big questions. There are two big questions that I think our conversations over the past, it's been 6 years, I believe. I've been around since 2015. I returned back to Gonzaga. Bailey and some other folks on our team were at that first 2014 meeting. And it really, since then, I think this network and these conversations have helped us think about, as we move into place-based work, like, how do we want to do it with intention, with care, with integrity, recognizing that this isn't, in a way, the traditional service learning model that I started 20 years ago in the field of service learning, and it has evolved and shaped. And I think the criticality of the work over particularly the last 10 years, and deeply connected to these questions around hyperlocal and place-based engagement, yet have reshaped, I think, the conversation and what is happening here at our university. So the first question that I think this work continues to bring to us, and the conversations from the network continues to bring, is how are our approaches to partnership being reshaped by the work with the network? And the four items that I named are not, I mean, this is nothing new to any of you, but I think for us, like, as we moved from a more traditional working with nonprofits toward a place-based hyperlocal approach, these were the questions and the themes that we've really sat with over the years. And as I was reflecting, there are moments and conversations that we've had over this past 6 years that have kind of highlighted these pieces or reinforced these pieces. And I say the first is around this need to, as we enter a community, this need to enter in a way that situates us as listeners first. There were conversations I remember with Jennifer early on at St. Mary's, and with Marie and Aaron at Loyola, that talked about how they entered in by starting first with listening. And I think for us, this has been such a critical movement to really understand community contexts and histories, and even challenge ourselves about, like, who do we have relationships with in the community, and who are we hearing from? Another theme that's come time and time again, and I think this is connected to that, like, how are we challenging white supremacy culture to move quickly and fast as we develop, but this movement toward slowing the work down. And the conversation with Jennifer Pigza last year, and there's a quote that I have around slow the roll. Like, how do we take time to really build and be in deep intentional relationships to really know the community and know each other? And then how are we shaped through deliberative practice? And these are questions around, like, whose knowledge matters, who are we listening to, who are we bringing, who are we bringing into the spaces, how are we entering into our spaces? Sorry, I've got people outside the door. I'm a little distracted. And let me, yeah, who are our communities? How are we building relationships? Do we have, what is the intentionality that we bring into those spaces? And then finally, I think that last question is about kind of how are we working to recenter power? And there is a conversation that we had with folks at Loyola Maryland about their resident committee, and how Loyola is one of 20. And so Loyola is a single partner that brings assets, but they're not leading the conversation. It's the community who drives and guides and leads. And I think this is something we continue to navigate, is how do we redistribute power back to the community, and recognize our own power and positionality in that space. So I don't know, Anthony, if you'd want to share anything around approach and how this work is, these conversations have shaped our approach.
Yeah, I would just mention some of the complicated parts of this, right, Molly? And I think we started there's been so much intentionality, particularly from you and Bailey and John and Mary Joan, like folks at our university that have, really engaged around this. But I think with the listening project, it was so wonderful to see how quickly it mobilized and pulled together, like connecting with so many partners. And I think one thing that we were thinking about deeply and troubled by was that, that resident level engagement is still really hard to get to. And that we have these not only in our center and at our university, but across like all of our networks, like these really codified ways of engaging with community that mean that we engage with nonprofits and resident leaders who have the time to engage, which might mean that there's a certain demographic of people with privilege, with nonprofit leaders who are not from the community, but talking for the community. And so like those people are wonderful and engaging and have something to say. And how do we still get to that, like, is there a truth we're missing about our community when we're talking about them? And I think that was something that came up for us in our listening project. Is we learned so much more through that process. Who were the resident community leaders? Like that guy, Paul Hamilton, who is like a real estate agent and like doesn't have any official title with like an organization, but like just happens to know everybody, or Natalia Gutierrez, who's like a mom in the community who started a grassroots organization. Like those people weren't on our radar before our place-based work really picked up, right? I mean, they were, but they weren't like forefront. So I think that has really shifted. And I think part of our next steps is like, how do we engage residents in real ways beyond the proxy of community partners who are great partners and good people and have something to say about the work, but shouldn't be supplanted for like capital or lowercase c, capital C community. I don't know which one to say there. So yeah.
It reminds me, there's a question that Ken asked us really early on. Like, if we were to come to Gonzaga and go into your community, who would we meet? Who is your community? And I think like 5-6 years ago, it was the schools. We had a handful of connections and partners, and after 5-6 years, like the people that we know, the connections that have been built through this deliberative practice of getting to know, listening, and bringing people in has completely shifted and continues to shift and reshape. And the second question, and I'll try to go, I know we're almost at time, but the second big question is how are we personally reshaped by this work? And I think this is kind of what we've sat with over the years as well. When I pulled a quote, there's a Jesuit theologian that talks about the long, loving look at the real. And for us, I think it's been, for I'd say me personally, this opening up of all of the problems of our practice, the internalized racism, the saviorism that has been embedded in the work, and re-examining how we show up, why we show up, where we show up, through this commitment to doing anti-racist work. And kind of similar to you, Gavin, as a team and as a department in the space where we kind of have a locus of control, we've explored where we are as a department and continue to try to change structures, policies, and practices to move ourselves along as an organization, but also working with others across the institution and with organizational partners to do the same. And it's long, hard work. And I think, a lot of the critique that we've gotten over the years is we talk and we learn, but where do we act and when do we actually make change? And again, I think the conversations of this network continue to inform, reinforce, and challenge us in the most beautiful and important ways. And then my last piece that I would say about this network and you all is the level of true humility, care, and challenge that you bring. And I think I have not experienced this in other spaces in the field. There is a willingness to be open, to be raw, to complicate, and to see the beauty and the hope and the power, the potential power of the work. So it has just been a gift to be involved. Anthony, I don't know, any last words, my dear friend who is leaving us in a week. Any last words, Anthony?
I don't want to take it from you, Molly. That was wonderful and beautiful. So no, that's good.
But thanks all, and thanks, yeah, for the time.
Sorry, out of humility and out of accountability, well, first, thanks to Gavin and Molly for sharing, but out of accountability, I just have to be transparent in my own commitment to urgency of timing, which is a symptom of white supremacy culture. I literally canceled Julia's voice in wrapping up her session, and really publicly acknowledging and thanking her for her facilitation. So I just want to recognize I still have a lot of work to do, and leave the floor open if Julia would like to say any other final comments for her session. But again, I have a lot of work to do, and my apologies for doing that.
I'll just share that I appreciate you naming that and holding that, Dan. And I also think it's a learning that we can carry forward as we coordinate and facilitate and co-create and collaborate with each other in the future and for future meetings too. So thank you, Dan. I do really appreciate that.
Thank you. We are now headed into a break for 15 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks, John, for the quick huddle we had to make some adjustments to our time and everything. So in our conversation with Julia, we were really focused on what is the purpose of place-based engagement, and really looking at collective healing as a process. And so in our conversation that John is going to get us kicked off with, we will focus on the question about what is the prophetic edge, what is the vision of the Place-Based Justice Network. So John's going to get us going. We'll have some individual reflection, group time, as well as then a large group synthesis that can accompany, be of the morning, both portions of our time. So John Loggins from University of San Diego, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. In a way, I feel like the conversation is already ongoing. I think, where the discussions that we've already had is kind of, in my mind, already kind of on that edge. And what I wanted to do is to give us as much time as we can to continue to share and kind of embody the work. But I did want to offer a little bit of context and some framing before we got started. So you'll see on the slide there, I had put this passage from Father Richard Rohr on kind of holding that space in the edge. And what I wanted to do is maybe just kind of unpack and maybe interpret this in a way that will help guide our conversation. So I'm just going to read the first portion of it here. The edge of things is a liminal space, a very sacred space. The edge is a holy place, or as the Celts called it, a thin place, and you have to be taught how to live there. And I think that taught how to live there is important because so much of our work is a discipline, is a practice. It's an opportunity, and I kind of know that, when some people think of leaders, they think of these great individuals who have been propelled to this leadership, and there is a role of leaders. And I think about kind of the prophetic edge the same way. I think we can all think of folks who have this prophetic voice, whether that be a James Baldwin or a Cornel West or an Octavia Butler. But I also think that it's, not about that. It's about the practice. Everybody can tap into that prophetic voice. Everybody can practice good leadership. But it's choosing to inhabit that space and choosing to be willing to work and lean into it and struggle with it and wrestle with it, because there is some risk involved in it, of course. And so what I'm hoping and what I love about the Place-Based Justice Network is that in my career, I feel like I was at a place where I was in the routine, and the network has always been a place where it's given me the opportunity to use a voice that's kind of pushing myself, our pedagogy, my institution, our center. And one of the things that I know we are keen on with the Place-Based Justice Network is trying to figure out how we use our voice collectively to move our field, to move and shape the communities that we have fallen in love with, the ones that we are rooted in and connected with. And that's why we are a place-based network. The second portion of it is a prophetic position, not a rebellious or antisocial one. When you live on the edge of anything with respect and honor, you are in a very auspicious position. You are free from critical central seductions, but also free to hear its core message from very new and creative ways. And that respect and honor place is where I think I also want to lead from, because so much of this work I think is rooted in how we're connected to the community. Like I know we can think of the Place-Based Justice Network as a pedagogy, and how do we have a prophetic voice from that pedagogical place. But my experience with tapping into that voice is more rooted in my connection with the community. When I'm thinking about like how are we going to move and transform these communities, more things become clear, more things become apparent, and more urgency comes into my mind. If we can advance to the next slide, Laura. So there's a couple of critical questions that we wanted to kind of to ponder today, and that is, what is the healthiest risk we can take towards justice? And I struck out the healthiest portion of it too, because I think, whenever we're talking about anti-racism or anti-oppression from a place of privilege, which I think we all are from our institutional standpoint, for me, and I'll say this is one of the edges I'm leaning into right now, is that the currency of that kind of allyship towards anti-racism is about risk, sacrifice, and urgency. You can talk about it all we want. We can do work about it all we want. There's people suffering, and if we're not doing anything about it, then we are not being good allies. For me, that's the kind of what I'm finding to be the bottom line. And so what I'm asking us to think about is like, how are we willing, or what are we willing to sacrifice? What are we willing to put out there in this conversation? And not to say like that we have to do this, but to play this edge, to kind of exist on the edge, we need to be thinking in those terms. So this isn't about a practice of like coming up with a plan of what we're actually going to do. This is a thought exercise and a practice about like pushing ourselves to that edge so we can expand our boundaries, and we can push our network, we can push our institutions a little bit further. And then the second question is more on the lines of like, thinking about what it is that you come up with, how can you actualize it? What do we need to do to make that manifest? And I would also add, thinking of the network as a place to support you to do that work. Because I think oftentimes when we're tapping into our edges, we're doing this alone. We're doing this in kind of without the support and network and resources of a place-based justice network. Some of us may have institutions that support this work, but some of us may come from institutions that resist and challenge it wholeheartedly. But here, within this place-based justice network, you have a space where we can kind of ponder these things and maybe try to actualize them and make them into a reality. And I'll stop there so we can actually get to the work. But what I was going to do is drop those questions in the chat so everyone can see, and then ask if you do a little bit of a free write at this time. So whether you're on your computer, you can shut your screens off. I'm going to play a 3-minute song. It was on my Spotify lists of top 3 songs. So it's just a good timing one, and I like the song, so hopefully you do too. If not, you can mute it and just write in silence. But I will ask that once the song is through, Laura, if you could put us in our groups, if that's all right. So again, the questions are in the chat. And I'm sorry, I'm reading some chat here.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'm musing.
Yeah, no, you're already on it. I like it. And so like, yeah, we'll have some great conversations, and then we'll reconvene at 10 till the hour. So 11:50 in Pacific Standard Time. So that gives us approximately 18 minutes or so after including the writing time. Well, welcome back. I know that seemed really quick to me, but I also value hearing everybody's voices and getting everybody the opportunity to hear what we're all sharing. And I know that we want to use the remainder of this time, I believe, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, to synthesize the day. So like, being able to reflect upon something that's come up for you, or something that you want to explore further, or something you want to name in the space. I think this would be a good space to do it. And or if you have a thought that was lingering, because I know in our group, Elaine was just about to say something, so please, this is our time to use together as we like to put some pieces together and to synthesize and do some work.
Elaine, would you like to kick us off with that idea you were about to share?
Not really. I was actually going to agree with Joy in that when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about strategy, something Joy mentioned in our group, and more about how I can take risks. Obviously, I don't work with just one campus like most of you do. And so strategically thinking about how we could offer, be very intentional about what we offer to our network and the folks that we work with, to really not only push ourselves as an organization, but also for those who are ready and willing to push themselves. And in many ways, a lot of it is doing the personal work. So we create opportunities. I've chosen to create opportunities where folks can convene, but to do a lot of personal work around this and take those risks, but in community, but being strategic about it.
In our small group, we had a couple of threads that, in my head, I'm synthesizing it in this particular way. Like, we had this around compensating our partners, and thinking about it from kind of the epistemic justice, like, what do we value and what wisdom? And then we had kind of a conversation about division of labor and what are we asking of folks? And, one of the things that I wrestle with too is especially as of last year with kind of the racial justice uprising, how many asks and requests came of me to have this conversation with this group and do these things. And it was a lot. It was a lot. A lot of it was asked for, to be gratis and, I want my time to be valued, but I also have that piece is like, this isn't just my work to be doing. And I know we have that conversation a lot in kind of this field. But again, thinking about it in terms of currencies, and these are just new thoughts, so forgive me if they're not coming out clear. But like if from a place of privilege, that the currency is around kind of risk taking or the urgency, dividing the labor of that work, then what is the currency for marginalized communities or communities that are down pressed? What is it that is it? Is it around vulnerability? Is it about helping build capacity for people to hold that conversation? So I was just thinking about it in terms of I know this work needs to be done, but I get really frustrated when people ask it of me all the time, and at the same time it's hard to say no, because if I'm not going to do it, who is, because I feel like there's a vacuum. So just wrestling with some of those notions and opening it up here, just because I don't have an answer clearly, but just as a thought of what came up with our conversation.
I was thinking of a way to share this in my small group, but I couldn't really articulate it, so I didn't. So apologies if this is also not super clear. The one thing that was said in my small group by someone was around following the community lead, and how do we like line up that with like what the network is doing. And that made me think of an earlier breakout room. I think it was like the first one from this morning, where I was talking with some folks around like, I'm also new to the network, right? But almost like a healthy risk is like really identifying what aspects of the network are for what. And I'll try to make more sense of that. We talked very honestly about how at times when the conversations we have as a group are focused like on our personal healing and like our personal like feelings, or I think the question was around like, how do we care for ourselves, some of that sort. It feels like hard for some of us who maybe have more of like a type personality, who like want to work, right? And we understanding like the need for space for that. But as somebody who's new, who's been in a few spaces now, it's like, how do we differentiate them, right? Like, does that need to take place in every space, or do we need to create spaces where maybe the engagement is a little bit further down the line? I believe it was Tandem, you were talking in our group about like your community is working with like reparations, and it's more like, it's a little bit different, right, than like talking about like, how do we support a community's healing. So how does like the network as like a structure create different spaces where like, if what you need, right, is that individual like space to reflect, to connect, to heal, like for ourselves as like individuals, that we can have that. But also if maybe some of us are working in a different step, to be able to like go into that, right? And like, when are we like writing ideas down, hopping on a shared document, typing out potential policies or potential new programs, like some of that, that more action like based like space. I think that's something that I was thinking in terms of like a healthy risk, is like being okay with like maybe creating spaces that are still like intentionally challenging like professionalism and productivity like perceptives, but also like producing like deliverables and outcomes. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
I'm liking what you're saying, Gabby, because to me, the one way that I kind of make sense of it is making sure that the work we do as a network is not just a place where we come for like refuge and conversation about really prophetic things, but that we don't actually take actions that could be prophetic and uncomfortable, personally and institutionally, and or even among the group, right? So I appreciate, yeah, thank you.
I agree. Like, I mean, like, I feel like that desire and the want to produce and to create with the community, I think that's a big part of the role. I'm just wrestling with my own, maybe it's because of my kind of current jadedness with it. And because I agree, I think we need strategy, we need to produce things. But I feel like, oftentimes in my experience, it's been met with like, kind of like, what is that saying? Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can do all these things, but ultimately it's going to come back down to it being a culture rooted in racism, a culture that has got so much historical roots. Until we can start to undermine and change the culture, and there could be strategies around that, of course, but like, it's one of those things that I just wanted to name and acknowledge that I feel like when I'm able to do good things, it feels so limited and so short-lived. And then I have to go back up and try to skate uphill all over again, oftentimes. And that's, again, could just be my jadedness. just want to just remind folks that if people wanted to re-engage in some of the conversations that we were having earlier too about the care, thank you for making that connection, Gabby. But like, I think we were talking a lot about accountability before, and there's some energy around that as well. So again, it's not just about the prophetic edge and the risk conversation that we want to synthesize, because I do think that they're connected for one, but also providing some space for that conversation, which also felt like there was more there.
I'll just add that in our conversation that we had, so we were broken up by the different committees. And so we, the small but mighty sustainability committee, we're thinking about how to sustain the network. And we talked a lot about like money, asking for money being a big risk, and being careful with who you take money from and not just taking it from anyone. And also being willing to leverage some of our own personal / institutional connections in service of something bigger than just us. I think that's a risk that we should all be willing to take, to be willing to like go out to people, even if it's not in our own institutional interest, to say, hey, I'm part of this network, and we know that we've received funding from you as our own institution, but would you also be interested in giving this to this collective? And I would hope that everybody on this, who's like involved in this work at this level, who's in this meeting, might be willing to take that risk on behalf of the network. And so maybe that's something we can kind of challenge each other to. I know we think a lot about it in the sustainability network, and I think we are, like, the fact that the Seattle University was willing to send 2 development officers to our sustainability meeting and say, yeah, we'd be willing to help you write a Kellogg Foundation letter of intent that may or may not actually directly financially benefit our institution, was like mind-blowing. I cannot imagine our development professionals ever wanting to do that. And so maybe that's on me. Maybe I need to be like asking them and like putting them point blank to say, hey, how can you help us with a collective fundraising effort? So that's just something that I think we could, even though the conversation started at the Sustainability Network, we could probably extend that to everyone, just as the national influence strategy could be asking us, the entire group, stuff to say, hey, could you mention this in your own professional networks to try to advance our own causes? Anyway, so yeah, that's something that came up for us.
Thank you, Kevin.
I don't know if this will be useful for other folks, but I hope it is. So totally unrelated to Place-Based Justice Network work, I saw CFP this morning talking about the concept of hard lines, soft lines, and lost lines in art. So hard lines being those that are necessary for perspective, to like make objects visible. Soft lines being those that are like blurry, like the Mona Lisa, chiaroscuro. You can tell it's a face, but you can't quite tell where the face ends and the background begins. And then lost lines, which are like they get lost. You can't even see them as lines. And when you were talking about like the edge, respective edge of PBJN work, I was kind of thinking that was a useful framework for me of thinking of, what are the like hard lines of our work that we can really visibly see, and those soft lines and those lines that exist that nevertheless we can't even see as lines, and where we would kind of measure our success in all 3 of those ways. So like I said, I don't know, that was useful for me. I'm kind of a conceptual thinker, but hopefully that might be useful for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Katie. I liked it. All right, so I realize every time I'm in one of these gatherings that I feel like I'm in a position of saying, we're not putting a period at the end of any of these conversations, that these are really ellipses, right? There's the ... of what is next. And so I do feel like we need to honor giving our bodies and our eyes a break again. before we lead into something that will feel perhaps a little bit more business-like, which is Kent as the chair of the network right now. And then our different working groups will kind of report out what we've been working on. But before we do that, I just want to again, I want to acknowledge Julia for this morning, and John, thank you. I love your Octavia Butler quote behind you. I read with some grad students, emergent strategies this semester, and one of them really just alighted upon this quote, and it's become really central for her this term. So thank you for bringing her into the space in your background, Octavia Butler and Adrienne Marie Brown. So we'll let's shorten this a little bit, and we'll come back at 12. What do we think? 12:15. That's like 6-7 minutes. Is that all right? At 15 after the hour? Okay, because that is still to get you off screen on time. Okay, see you at 15 after.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Kent Koth from Seattle University, from the Sunborg Center for Community Engagement, and I am the chair of the PBJN steering committee. And I just want to welcome those of you who are new to the network, and also those of you who have been traveling this journey for some time. And I want to honor the ability for us to collectively have significant influence on each other and on our institutions, but also on our field. And I think, Gabby, to your point a little while ago, there's a very practical part of our work, which is sort of where we roll up our sleeves and we get stuff done. And I guess I'm sort of that window of the meeting today where I'm gonna invite some different people to share some updates. And I also just wanna encourage us to think of one of the great things about the network is I think we have a culture of invitation. So there are ways to get involved or to deepen our involvement. And I've appreciated how so many have deepened their involvement over the past couple of years as the networks become more structured. So I'm gonna turn to some different individuals to provide some updates. And I think that Jennifer, the time frame on this is maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So total.
Yeah, as long as we can do our closing reflection, maybe by 10 till the hour.
Okay. All right. So we've got a little bit of time for some different updates, and I'll turn to each of you providing updates, and then we can open up for any questions. And then I'll just kind of keep us moving to be attentive that we finish this part of our meeting by 10 till the hour of whatever time zone you're in. Mm-hmm. So just want to welcome John to provide some updates on the BIPOC Leadership Collective.
Happy to, Kent. Thank you all. I think most of you all know that the BIPOC Leadership Collective was formerly known as the Next Generation Fellowship. We had a shift in the name change and a little bit of shift in the direction. We really valued the voices that the fellows were contributing to the network. Many of them are on the steering committee or parts of various committees within the network right now. And initially we had set it up to be a fellowship for emerging professionals of color in the field. But we found that wisdom comes from all places, as we were talking about with epistemic justice. So the life experience, their work experience, they were able to contribute a lot. So instead of seeing them as fellowships, but seeing them as leaderships in this network and pulling them together as a collective in ways they can meaningfully connect and support member institutions was important. So we had the shift, we did a call for nominations, and we had 19 nominees altogether, and we invited each of them to apply. We are waiting for the applications to still come in. We've already have, I believe, 6 applications in, and the deadline is the 22nd of December. So there's still a little bit more time for applicants to apply. And we, once we have those applicants in, we will start to review them and invite them for interviews, and then with the support of the Place-Based Justice Network, select a wonderful group of a wonderful new cohort. And when we have more updates out, I'm happy to share who those people are. I think some of you here have nominated some folks, and this is the hardest part of the thing is the selection process. So I'm not looking forward to it, but I am super excited about the number of people that have participated and are applying. And that's a brief summary. Any questions or thoughts?
John, thanks for your leadership on that, and big thanks to Julia as well, and also in evolving with what we're learning. I think that's one of the strengths of the network, is sort of continual learning and making changes as we go, as it makes sense, and particularly the evolution of the BIPOC Leadership Collective. We're structured, the Place-Based Justice Network is structured in a way where we have a steering committee of 10 people, and then we have 3 specific working groups: member engagement, sustainability, and national influence. And so these next updates all nestle within those working groups. So I'm going to turn to
Hey, can I maybe bump up on mine, because I have a 2:30 meeting that I need to get to. I'm so sorry.
That's okay, but 2:30 is still 2 hours and 10 minutes away, Gavin. Yeah, Gavin, take it away. We'll turn to sustainability in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, y'all. This got extended by like 30 minutes, and like then I had something that popped up on my calendar before that happened. Anyway, so I'm really sorry. But this, I think, will be a fairly quick update, because we just met as a steering committee not too long ago, and I think most people know this, but for those of you all who are not officially on the steering committee, I wanted to make sure that you all knew. I just put in the chat a Kellogg Foundation letter of intent that we hope to submit ASAP, and we're going to be finalizing this at our next sustainability committee meeting next week. So, and as I mentioned, Seattle University has been willing to give some development professional staff time to help us think about how to do this. Anyway, but essentially, you can help. Look over this language. It cannot be longer than 300 words total. So it's really hard to describe what we want to do with the Place-Based Justice Network in 300 words or less. So please let us know if you all have any particular updates that you would like to see. Just do it as like a comment or a suggestion or something like that. And if there's somebody who can't, for whatever reason, edit it, just feel free to let me know. And I have put my email in the chat, so you can certainly contact me. That's really our big update for the sustainability group. I mean, I'm going to be meeting, I think Kent now and I are going to be meeting with somebody from the American Family Insurance Institute, in hopes that they might be interested in the Place-Based Justice Network, but like no promises. So we're trying to like find other ways that we can do this. To come for the sustainability committee is going to be a larger conversation about sponsorship, and we will be doing that alongside the steering committee, of course, but getting our thoughts in order and maybe putting something in front of the steering committee for us to consider, you know, just kind of like ethical guidelines of how we might accept a gift or not accept a gift, and why we might make those decisions. But that's in the future. So I think that's it. Is there anybody on the committee? I don't know, Aaron, Laura, Molly, if you all want to add anything, please let me know. Silence.
Any questions for Gavin about that application? I would just call out them. I have great gratitude for our corporate and foundation relations team at CLU, who are kind of fellow travelers with us in this work. So appreciate your connection with them, Gavin. All right, so we'll go back up to member engagement, and I'm going to turn to Fran to describe the salons that would be coming in winter and spring.
Sure. Thank you, Kent. Hi, everybody. My name is Fran Lowe, and I'm calling in from the University of Washington in Seattle, from our Community Engagement and Leadership Education Center. So one of the things that the Member Engagement Committee has been working on is creating salons for members. I'm going to read the definition of salons that Jennifer and Anthony found or put together. I love it. You know, a salon is a gathering of people where they amuse one another and increase their knowledge through conversation. So that was kind of the basis of what we were thinking about as we were developing these salons, and we introduced and
offered 2 different peer coaching salons this past fall that kind of tried to serve 3 purposes. One is to really just draw on the collective wisdom of all the members in this network, and also to be able to provide some support and challenge for us as members in this network to address some of our current challenges and opportunities in our work. And also 3, that that we as members can really leave these peer coaching salons with some really concrete ideas that will help us advance our work. So we held 2 salons. I think like 15 people came to the first one, about 5 to the second one. So we do hope to continue offering these in the winter and in spring, dates to be determined. But we also welcome any feedback that anyone has about how these salons are working for folks. And if anyone else has other ideas for topics for these salons, please do let us know.
Questions for Fran about the salons? All right, I'm not seeing anybody moving their eyes towards the unmute. So we will keep moving here. Earlier in our conversations, I think, John, you might have offered the wisdom of accountability as care. And we are exploring offering, which we've done in the past, a white affinity accountability circles. And I want to thank Tandon for taking the lead on that. And Tandon, turn to you for an update and information sharing on that.
You can't. I'm Tanner Brecky, and I'm from Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Got a little snowstorm brewing over here, so hopefully I can make it home safely tonight. So I'm new to this group here. We met last week, did some initial planning. I'm going to read out the mission and or the goal and the outcomes that we have that have been built off of those who've come before us. So these have been drafted over the last few years. So here's the goal is through our white affinity and accountability work, PBJN will build a community of white folks across the US who have a foundation that deepens our personal and professional commitments, knowledge, and abilities to advance anti-racism on campus, in our communities, and in our centers. And then there's 4 outcomes. Outcome number 1 is to build community, increase understanding of race, racism, anti-racism, whiteness, white body supremacy, and white supremacist culture. Number 3 is develop emergent strategies for accountability regarding anti-racism work that can be employed at institutions and in communities across the United States, including various religious contexts. And then various regions and contexts. And then number 4 of our outcomes is build our capacity and resistance to dismantle oppressive systems, individually, interpersonal, organizational, and systemic. So we, at our last meeting, talked about meeting monthly for an hour and a half from 12 to 1:30 on the second Tuesdays of the month. So that information will be coming out. We're going to ask individuals, not require it, but ask individuals to come or to commit to come to all 3 sessions from February through April so that we can build some community and some consistency with those who are attending. It will be, we're going to open it up to, or officially say that community partners are more than welcome to come to these gatherings. We are open to having some facilitators. So if anyone in your network or anyone here would love to help facilitate, please let us know. I'll put my email in the chat here, so you can email me directly if you'd like to do some facilitation. What else was I asked to? Oh, we're going to meet again on the 12th of January do some more planning, develop a little bit more structure and some content that we're going to be offering. So we're still kind of in the beginning phases of unrolling what will happen February through April. So that's all that I have.
Thanks, Tandon. Questions for Tandon? I appreciate you stepping into this role, Tandon, and I hope that you get home safely today in the snow. All we have here is constant drizzle here in Seattle. Fran and I here in Seattle. I guess, and Aaron and a number of others. I'm going to turn now and just describe a little bit about plans for the Summer Institute. And so for those of you who are new to the Place-Based Justice Network, each summer we have, for the past 5 or 6 summers, we've offered a Summer Institute. In pre-pandemic times, it was in person. It's been in Minneapolis, it's been in Baltimore, it's been here in Seattle. The past couple summers, it has been a virtual experience. And it is a multi-day experience, and it's a chance for us to connect more deeply and to share more of our common practices, to explore the purpose of our network as we have today, but explore that experientially, particularly when we've been in person, but also experientially through some very creative ways that we've done that in the virtual space. So we're exploring currently the kind of question of, do we offer a experience in person or virtual or hybrid? We're also in conversation with 2 different institutions about sort of this, sort of exploring what may be possible. Jen, who's here with us and exploring sort of Drexel and Philadelphia. And then Jamie, who stepped off a little while ago, and I wanted to thank her for bringing August to our meeting. It's always nice to see little ones present with us. Jamie's from the University of Pittsburgh. Some of the things we're exploring there, the questions are obviously around health safety in terms of what the pandemic might allow at this time. There's also questions of the cost of a convening and the cost to each of us to get there, and some of the challenges we might be having in terms of budgets around travel. So we're trying to factor all those in. Currently, where we're at is doing a little bit of information gathering, both at Drexel and at the University of Pittsburgh, to be thinking of what are the capabilities of in-person, hybrid, or all virtual. And what we're going to do then is come to our January steering committee meeting and talk more about that and hopefully make some decisions from there. So I'm going to pause, and then I have a couple other thoughts about Summer Institute, but I'm just going to pause and see if any of the steering committee members or Jen, if you have any comments about sort of Summer Institute, or anyone that has any questions about that exploration of the different modalities that it might be.
How do the attendance at the virtual session compare with the virtual ones that you've offered, with understanding that the organization has continued to evolve as well?
Yeah, so I think the in-person experiences, the attendance had been growing from probably 60 at one of our first gatherings to more like 100 at our last gathering that was in Minneapolis. And then virtual, trying to, if Aaron could see me right now, but I'm looking at you, Aaron. I'm trying to remember numbers from last summer.
Yeah, we had about 130 people at our last virtual Summer Institute, which of course is a product both of the growth of the network and the ease of attendance.
Jen, I saw you were unmuting.
Yeah, Ken, I was going to say that in our conversation about this, Jamie from Pitt has some just wonderful things that they could bring to the table for this in a world where we think we want to go in person. Drexel has a different set. We also have some real limitations in terms of affordable on-campus housing, right? So, but, I feel like, should we end up at Pitt, there's going to be a really wonderful experience, right? All depending on what the COVID situation is around that time. And of course, there's, so many of our institutions took such a hit in our budgets that we are really conscious that A lot of folks may literally not have the funding from their departments to be able to travel, even if they had the willingness and felt safe about it. So those are some things that are in play in terms of factors we're thinking about.
So more soon on the modality of how we're going to gather. Elaine, I see that you're unmuted.
Oh, I was just going to ask a quick question of how much in consideration is a hybrid approach?
I would say that is sort of a key consideration of thinking of, could we have some people in person, some that are hybrid? And one of the things that we were thinking about from our last meeting is even talking with some of the entities. I know that NASPA just did a Western Regional gathering in San Francisco that was a hybrid experience. So exploring what that, what it takes, and our other consideration was, does that take more to do it in person and hybrid? And then do we have the capacity to do that? And selfishly, there's a number of you that I'm looking at that I've never met, but we've spent like hours together. So, and I know that probably a number of you have the same experience. So it'd be terrific to be in person. But there's obviously a lot of different factors there. The second thing I wanted to mention around the Summer Institute is it does take then some leadership of somebody and some buddies saying, I want to help to organize the content. And in past years, that's been a team of 4 to 5 people. In past years also, we've had support from Seattle U. I think that you probably all know that Erin Burrows is sadly leaving her position at the end of next week to move to the Eastern time zone, to Boston, and has taken a job in Boston. So just recognizing that we're going to be a little bit more thinly staffed. I'm thankful that Laura, who's been an intern working with us, is taking on some of the administrative supports for the network, but probably doesn't have as much of the bandwidth that Erin had to do some of the more Summer Institute things. So maybe at this point, do 2 things. It's already occurring. Let's thank Erin in the expressions that we can do through a virtual format, emojis or otherwise. And then just want to sort of maybe I'll pause, Erin, and see if you have any comments, and then I'll segue on to the rest of this. I think it's good to honor sort of, you have provided such stellar leadership for the past 5 years and have really shepherded the whole process of the network really not even being a network and then becoming more formalized. So I just want to thank you. And do you have any comments for the group?
No pressure. Complete gratitude for this opportunity. It's been one of the more galvanizing experiences of my career in higher education, and doing movement work and braiding those things together with so many brilliant thinkers and leaders. And just to see the sustainable growth and the interest in doing this work in ethical and just ways is really quite incredible. And so I hope to stay in touch. We'll see if that can happen in a professional way or just, hanging out in the LinkedIn group. But truly been transformed personally and been really grateful to help shape what the network has become. So thank you all for this experience.
Thanks, Erin. We had a little party on Tuesday evening for Erin, and I gave her a bottle of peanut butter and a thing of jam in honor of the PBJ network. But I just want to thank you, Erin, for how you bring your values as well as your strategic acumen to everything that you do. That blend has really been powerful for this network. So back to the Summer Institute, it is an open invitation. If you have an interest in organizing content, and I think the Summer Institute's going to occur. We don't know what modality yet, but it might be thinking of content around how we can be sharing information from what we're doing around place-based work, but also sort of content that's focused on our purpose, which is deconstructing systems of oppression through place-based community engagement. So that's kind of a teaser for probably an invitation, a more formal invitation that will be coming out in January. I'm going to shift now to do the hypothetical dates exist or evolving based on location? Probably based on location, Bridget, sort of figuring out like what makes the most sense, particularly if we're going to be in person. Typically, the gathering has occurred anywhere from the 3rd week in June to the mid-August. So it's kind of in that window. I think we have found that trying to do it in June or August is a little bit better than July because a lot of folks are away in July. But that's about as clear as we have probably for dates at this point. I'm going to turn to Karen, John, and Jen in terms of national influence and our strategy of the Place-Based Justice Network.
I can get that started. And I want to say, Karen and John, please jump in because I'm definitely going to miss something. But in the National Strategy Working Group, we were thinking about some of the sort of the channels and the platforms that this network has to shift the way that higher ed is thinking about anti-racism with respect to civic engagement and anchor missions. And so our team is looking at a combination of some shorter term to medium term to longer term projects in that sense. So imagine blogs as something that can be produced and shared pretty quickly. Conference, sort of getting ourselves kind of space in conference lineups and getting sessions in some of the major national relevant conferences. And then also doing things like speaking with journal editors, right? Like what's one of the currencies of higher ed is journals and articles and conferences, right? And so how can we inhabit that space as well? It's kind of thinking about some special issues. And so we'll be glad for folks who are interested in things like thinking about content for both some of those short-term and to medium-term to longer-term opportunities, writing some blog entries, thinking about how we would organize some conference sessions and the kind of content that we would advocate for if we were able to get a special journal edition in something like Metropolitan University's journal or the like. Karen and John, what did I leave out?
I think you got it. I dropped in the chat a link to what is really a skeleton. We haven't even started to populate it to make concrete a strategic plan. And one of the first steps will be mapping relationships between that pre-exist between the Place-Based Justice Network and other national organizations, right? So we don't need to recreate the wheel. For example, we've got Elena Cato right here in the room and also on the committee. So we'll map what already exists and then come up with strategic moves for the network to make. And that will largely be driven by interest from folks in this meeting. So folks can self-select and we'll be prompting folks to think about, okay, when you're presenting, are there ways to link to the network or call in the network in some way, for example, or writing?
We are meeting, I want to say monthly on a Monday, maybe it's around the second or so Monday of the month. Anybody who wants to jump in on this with us, please shoot Karen or John or me your email and any one of us can forward the meeting invitation to you.
Questions about the national influence strategy? Questions for Jen, Karen, or John? All right, not seeing any unmuting occurring. But I do want to recognize it's been exciting to see how the Place-Based Justice Network is being talked about in other settings. And I think that is the significance of being really strategic and trying to influence conversations. And sort of the collective approach to that is there's a lot of power in that. So final update is on future administrative, I'd say physical as an administrative home of the network. So currently, for the past 4 years, Seattle University has been the fiscal and administrative home for the Place-Based Justice Network. which means that sort of we're doing the bookkeeping on the finances. We've had staffing 25% on paper. 25% of Erin's time is Place-Based Justice Network. At times, I think it might have been a little bit more. And then we're also, I mean, as described earlier, in some cases, we're able to involve some of our advancement folks here. We've made a commitment to continue that through next June. There's some possibility that could continue beyond next June, but we're wanting to take the next few months to more strategically and kind of thoughtfully explore what are the possibilities of sort of the for this next phase of the network for administrative home. And there's a small group that's going to come together in early January. I think that is Gavin, Jennifer Pigza, and then Jamie Dukar. And we're going to have a conversation. There's really 3 or 4 different options. 1, it could remain at CLU. 2, it could be housed within another institution of higher education. 3, it could be nestled within a regional or national community engagement or otherwise organization. And 4, it could become its own nonprofit. So what I think our intention is to do a little bit of pros cons on those explorations, and develop a little bit of a criteria of how to vet that question. I think one of the big criteria will be what can really advance our mission and purpose, and do any of these limit the potential of sort of advancing that mission and purpose. And then there's just some practical things around, like, what does it really take to run the network? So we'll take that then to the steering committee and have a discussion, and probably then end up gathering more information after that to try to reach some clarity by February or early March. So that's kind of where we're at with the network. It's really a natural evolution of kind of where we're at. I don't think any of us had really ever envisioned when we were initially meeting that this would become what it is. And it's been quite a journey. So any questions about what I've shared about the fiscal administrative home? Okay, that's kind of my update. I would say that I'm serving in this role through June, and I'm excited this year that we have a vice chair, Jamie Dukar from the University of Pittsburgh, who will capably take over for me after this year. Doesn't mean I'm going to disappear, but just means I won't be in this role. And I want to thank all of you who have been on the steering committee this year, and also those who have just sort of joined in to contribute to these different working groups. It's really quite amazing, sort of the collective approach and the number of people who are getting involved. So thanks so much. I will pass it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Kent. And I want to thank you for your leadership all these years as well. Thank you. And I want to say, I think at one point there were 29 people maybe on this call. So I know folks have needed to come in and out, but I think it does really speak to, this as our leadership retreat is the way that we've been able to engage so many different people in the working groups and in making the work of the network more networked, quite frankly. So I just want to appreciate everyone in that way as well, and those who needed to leave already. So we're going to just do a closing reflection. Again, I always feel like there's like so much going on after this kind of gathering, and it's Friday, and it's, so many other things you might add for yourself. So what I would invite us to do, in fact, let me actually look at my notes. I want to think about the so what and now what for us as individuals. So we've been focusing a lot of our attention today, particularly this, I would say, like movement 2 and 3 with John, and then in this conversation with Kent, thinking very much about the network per se. And I would say the first movement of the day with Julia, it seemed like very much was like both personal and network or institutional. But as we close out the day with each other, what is the so what and now what for you as an individual? So what from today has really mattered to you? And perhaps what is one commitment or intention that you would put forward today that kind of emerged through these conversations, through our being together, through our listening? So we'll take a minute or two in quiet. And then Laura, are you still there? You are there. Laura's still here. Thank you. If we could have groups of, all right, thank you, Elaine. Groups of 3, just for whoever's remaining. And then we'll come back to do just a quick send off. So go ahead and send us to groups of 3 as you think about what is a personal intention that you would leave this day with. All right, welcome back. If we could just see the next slide, Laura, please. I just want to thank the planning team for today before we do our final checking out of the day. So Dan, Aaron, myself, Laura, Lori, and Molly. So thank you. And then to Julia and John for facilitating our large group conversations, and Molly and Gavin for their lightning talks about what's happening on their campuses. So thank you